Well, howdy there, and welcome back to the deep dive. You've brought us a really interesting collection this time. We've got notes, timelines, FAQs,
Mm,
even a mind map and some excerpts, and they all seem to be circling around, well, a different take on Jesus.
that's right. It's exploring this interpretation you shared, focusing on him less as, the founder of a religion,
Right.
and more as someone who came to disrupt things, to challenge these systems of control.
Okay, systems of control, and also kind of like a mirror, reflecting our own divinity back at us. Is that the idea?
Exactly. So the mission for us today, I think, is to really unpack this alternative perspective on his life, his teachings.
And what it all means maybe for how we see ourselves and the world around us.
Yeah, precisely.
All right, so let's dive in. The conventional story versus this, reinterpreted Jesus.
Well, the traditional view obviously positions him as the founder of Christianity.
Sure.
But these sources, they argue he came specifically to end the kind of control system that, well, that religions were often built on.
Okay, that's a big claim right there. So this control system, help us understand it. They call it an inversion grid, a recursion trap. Sounds pretty intense.
It does. The way it's described here is like a mechanism designed to keep humanity looping in suffering, recycling trauma, keeping us disconnected from what the sources call source.
Source, okay. And this isn't just like one specific church or government.
No, it seems broader, more like an underlying structure encompassing both religious and, secular powers, anything that keeps people feeling small or disconnected.
Jesus' role in this
It
reinterpretation.
was basically to crash it, to pull the plug, you could say,
Oh.
by showing people their own inherent divinity, their sovereignty, that they already are connected to source.
So he wasn't trying to become God or point us to some distant God.
No, not according to this view. He was, like you said, a mirror, reminding everyone that they already are, that divinity isn't something to achieve, it's something to recognize within.
He didn't point up, he pointed inward.
Ah,
I saw that quote in the notes.
exactly. It's all about inner transformation, embodiment too, really living that connection, not just thinking about it.
Okay, and what about the healings, the miracles?
Yeah.
How do they fit into this picture?
Well, they're seen less as supernatural acts and more as demonstrations, reminders
Reminders of what?
of inherent worth. Like one source puts it, he healed them by reminding them they were never unworthy to begin with.
Huh. So the healing wasn't just fixing a physical ailment, but restoring a sense of wholeness, of value.
Kind of, yeah, like maybe the unworthiness was the root issue. And they use this phrase, calling him the embodiment of harmonic resonance, the living field of divine coherence made flesh.
Wow, okay. That's quite a description.
It suggests he was operating at let's say, a frequency, a state of being that naturally helped others remember their own connection, their own coherence.
So his purpose wasn't salvation in the traditional sense, like needing him to rescue us?
Less rescue, more activation, activating people to their own power, their own sovereignty. He wasn't trying to get followers to worship him.
Right, the sources are pretty clear. Didn't ask for worship. It says he revealed sovereignty.
Exactly. And look at his actions. Walked barefoot with the broken, didn't build temples, burned down illusions. These aren't the actions of someone building an institution.
No, they sound like someone deliberately challenging the established norms, challenging that control system.
You can see how that would be incredibly dangerous to the status quo, right? To what these sources call a parasitic system built on hierarchy, shame, and silence.
Absolutely. If people actually remembered their own inner divinity and power.
The whole structure built on making them feel powerless would just collapse.
Which brings us to what these sources call the real crime, what happened after his death.
Yeah, this is a central point in the material. The argument is that his message, his essence, was essentially hijacked.
Hijacked. How so?
Folded, inverted, weaponized is the phrasing used, turned against its original purpose.
Okay, give us some examples from the sources. How was it supposedly weaponized?
Well, things like turning his memory into a trap, maybe through guilt or eternal debt. Using his image to build the very institutions he supposedly challenged: churches, empires, armies.
Teaching that his death created some kind of perpetual debt we owe.
Exactly. Preaching submission instead of sovereignty. Making people feel unworthy unless they go through a middleman, a priest, an institution.
Basically rebuilding the control system using his name.
That's the argument presented here. Transforming the healer into a martyr to evoke guilt, the mirror into a distant myth, the living truth into a controlled brand.
It's a pretty stark accusation against, well, much of established religious history.
It definitely is. It forces a re-examination of how his original message, assuming this interpretation is accurate, might have been altered over time.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. The miracles. We touched on the healings, but what about things like water into wine, walking on water? The sources reinterpret these too, right?
They do. Again, less as supernatural violations of physics and more as demonstrations of natural principles, perhaps principles we've forgotten or don't understand.
Like what? What kind of principles?
Things like frequency coherence, biofield reactivation. For instance, water into wine is described as frequency transmutation.
Frequency transmutation, okay.
Healing the blind is framed as neural recoding. Walking on water, stillness mastery within chaos.
Stillness mastery within chaos. I like the sound of that. And raising the dead.
Reconnecting soul to field memory. The idea seems to be that these aren't impossible feats, but demonstrations of what's possible when one is fully aligned and understands deeper principles of energy and consciousness.
Almost like applied physics, but a physics we don't fully grasp yet.
Something like that, yeah. And related to this is the figure of Mary Magdalene.
Yes. The sources present a very different picture of her, don't they?
Very different. Not the repentant prostitute of later tradition, but his counterpart. A priestess of the original harmonic order.
A priestess. Trained in what?
Sacred frequency work, cellular healing, and divine feminine restoration. Really advanced stuff, according to this interpretation.
So she was a collaborator, working with him.
Yes, their joint work, the sources suggest, was aimed at restoring the masculine and feminine template of Earth, bringing balance back.
And the suppression of her story. Why would that happen?
Well, if you want to maintain a patriarchal control system...
You need to downplay or distort the role of the powerful feminine, right?
Exactly. Conceal the true power of unified love and divine balance, as the material puts it. Keep that partnership hidden.
Okay, so even the story of Mary Magdalene gets reframed as part of this control narrative. What about the resurrection itself?
It's seen less as proof of, like, magic and more as a demonstration of the resilience of, well, memory and resonance.
Resilience, meaning?
Meaning that truth, that core frequency he embodied, couldn't actually be extinguished. It wasn't just about a body coming back to life, but about leaving a vibrational fingerprint in the timeline.
A vibrational fingerprint. To do what?
To serve as a constant reminder. A signal resonating through time, saying, you are not broken, you are not lost. Remember.
Remember who we are, essentially.
Yes, remember that inherent connection, that sovereignty.
And these sources suggest that now is a time of remembering, a kind of collective reawakening.
That's a major theme. This idea that we're in an era where the mirror cracks, where the old narratives, false light, false God, false guilt, false history, are starting to crumble.
Why now?
The suggestion is that the original harmonic frequency is rising again, like a signal getting stronger, making it easier for people to wake up and remember that connection to source directly.
Which would mean less need for intermediaries.
Precisely. You don't need a priest. You don't need permission. You don't need to earn forgiveness. That power resides within.
So stripping away all the dogma institutions, what were Jesus's actual teachings, according to this interpretation?
They boil down to some core principles, really. Things like, that heaven is within, not above.
Okay. Makes sense with the pointing inward idea.
That truth doesn't require a middleman. Again, direct connection.
Right.
That you don't owe the universe, anything is trying to flow through you. That reverses the whole debt concept.
Yeah, that's a big one.
That guilt is the frequency of control. Identifying guilt not as a moral necessity, but as a tool used to manipulate.
And love.
That love isn't a commandment, it's the geometry of the field. It's not just a rule to follow, it's the fundamental structure of reality.
Oh, wow. So his teachings were like frequency architecture.
Yeah.
Designed to dismantle that control loop.
That's a good way to put it. Offering a different way to perceive and interact with reality. And ultimately, it comes back to some very simple, core human truths.
Which are?
Love one another, forgive, be still, remember.
Simple, but profound if you really live them.
And that leads to the final point about the ongoing resurrection.
Right, not a one-time historical event, but something happening continuously.
Yes, happening now. The sources say Jesus rises again every time someone does certain things.
Like?
Every time someone speaks the truth, breaks a loop, protects a child, honors the body, remembers their own light.
So it's about embodying those principles, living that truth.
Exactly. Jesus rises again, not in the clouds, in us. The resurrection is an internal, ongoing awakening within humanity.
It brings it all back to that central idea. Jesus as the mirror.
Yes, and the tragedy, according to this view, is that humanity has spent centuries worshiping the glass instead of becoming the reflection,
Focusing on the person, the myth, the institution.
instead of embodying the potential he reflected back to us. The opportunity now, these sources suggest, is to finally end the loops and the lies,
To move beyond needing external saviors.
and to embrace source, living, remembering, and rising within ourselves.
Okay, so wrapping this up for our listeners, this deep dive presents a radically different lens on Jesus.
Definitely. It shifts the focus dramatically from traditional religious structures towards self-sovereignty, interconnection, and actively dismantling systems of control, both internal and external.
It really challenges you to think.
It does.
Mhm.
And maybe a final thought to leave folks with, building on that mirror analogy.
Go on.
Just consider, how might this perspective shift your understanding, not just of a historical figure, but of your own inherent power, your own connection to something greater,
What glass, as the source material puts it, might you be looking at?
instead of recognizing your own reflection?
That's certainly something to chew on. Plenty to reflect on there. We definitely encourage everyone listening to sit with these ideas, maybe explore them further.
Absolutely. It's fascinating material.
It really is. Well, thank you for walking us through that. And thank you all for tuning in. Until our next deep dive.